You know, when we think of Moses, the first image that comes to mind is of the great leader who freed the Israelites from slavery in Egypt. It's easy to forget that he was also a father, a husband, and like all of us, faced personal and family dilemmas. But have you ever stopped to think about his children, the boys who grew up in the shadow of one of the greatest prophets in the Bible? I've always wondered, what happened to them? What's it like to live in the shadow of such a monumental figure? So today I'm going to share with you the story the Bible doesn't tell, the story of Gershom and Eliezer, Moses' hidden sons. But before we dive in, make sure you're subscribed to our channel and turn on notifications to stay updated with all our new content. To understand Moses' life, we need to take a step back in time, to Egypt, where everything began. The Bible presents Moses as a central figure, but his origin is marked by dramatic and emotional events that shape not only his destiny, but also the fate of an entire people. He was born during a time of great oppression, when the Pharaoh had ordered that all newborn Hebrew boys be killed. In this dark context, his biological mother, Jochebed, faced a heart-wrenching dilemma. To save him from death, she hid him among the reeds of the Nile, trusting that God would take care of her little boy. Imagine the despair and hope that filled Jochebed's heart as she placed her child in a basket and set it afloat on the Nile's waters. Every drop that hit the basket was a silent prayer, a cry for protection. This act of courage and faith was rewarded when Pharaoh's daughter found Moses and decided to adopt him, raising him as her own son. So he went from a boy at risk of death to an Egyptian prince, enjoying luxuries and privileges unimaginable for his people. But behind the palace doors, there was an internal conflict. Though Moses lived in opulence, his heart always beat with the pain and oppression of his Hebrew people. He was a man torn between two cultures and identities. I remember how the scripture tells us in Exodus 2:11-12 that in a moment of anger, he found himself attacking an Egyptian who was beating a Hebrew, resulting in an act of violence that would change his life forever. This decision not only forced him to flee Egypt, but also ignited the flame of leadership within him, a flame that could only be quenched by God's call. After fleeing, Moses found shelter in Midian, where he met Jethro, the priest who would become his father-in-law. Picture this, a man on the run, tired and lost, stumbling upon a new life. Jethro not only welcomed him, but gave him a chance to start over. Life in Midian brought Moses not only peace, but also a new love. He married Zipporah, a Midianite woman who gave him two sons, Gershom and Eliezer. Now, these boys, Gershom and Eliezer, are almost footnotes in the grand story of Moses. But I like to imagine their daily lives. What was it like for Gershom and Eliezer to grow up in a house where their father was a fugitive, a potential leader, but also a man struggling with his own identity? Every laugh, every game, every story Moses told them at night must have been filled with deep lessons and meanings. Gershom, whose name means a stranger in a strange land, carries within him the duality of his father's life. He grew up in an environment that was both his home and a place where he never truly belonged. This fractured identity must have caused internal conflicts, a constant struggle to find his place in the world. Imagine the confusion in the mind of a boy who watches his father struggle to help a people he never fully knew. He must have wondered, where do I fit in? What does it mean to be a Hebrew if I was raised as an Egyptian? Eliezer, whose name means God is my help, symbolizes the trust Moses placed in God throughout his life. From the moment he was called from the burning bush to the challenges in the desert, Moses always knew he was not alone. He knew that his strength came from something greater than himself. These names are not just words, they are declarations of identity that shape who they are. When Zipporah called her children, she wasn't just calling Gershom and Eliezer. She was invoking the story of their family, the struggle and faith that bound them together. Also, think about the lessons Moses probably shared with his kids. He was always on the move, handling massive responsibilities. But his time in Midian also gave him a chance to teach his sons about faith and hope. Imagine those long days when Moses sat under a tree, telling Gershom and Eliezer about the God who revealed himself to him, about the promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. These stories weren't just tales, they were the roots that connected the boys to their heritage, to their identity. So, while Moses was struggling to find his way between two cultures, his sons were living at the crossroads of two realities. The struggle for family identity must have been a quiet but intense battle. While the Hebrew people cried out for liberation, Moses' family was also trying to figure out who they were in the midst of all this turmoil. Moses' life as a father wasn't simple. Between the huge responsibilities of leading the Hebrews out of slavery and the constant pressure of his divine mission, there was a much more human and complex reality at home. One of the most intriguing and, at the same time, disturbing moments is found in Exodus 4:24-26. Picture the scene. Moses, on his way to Egypt, carrying the monumental task of freeing his people, is confronted with a life-threatening situation. God almost killed him. Can you believe it? A sudden and unexpected twist that makes us ask, what was really going on here? In this critical moment, Zipporah stands out as an unexpected heroine. When everything seemed to fall apart, she took drastic action. With determination, she grabbed a sharp stone and circumcised her son Gershom, touching Moses' feet with the foreskin while declaring, "You are indeed a bridegroom of blood to me." This wasn't just an act of obedience. It was an intervention full of meaning and symbolism. Circumcision was a practice deeply rooted in Hebrew tradition, a sign of the covenant between God and the people of Israel, as commanded in Genesis 17:10-14. However, Zipporah, being a Midianite, might have had a different understanding of this ritual. This moment reveals an underlying cultural tension between Moses and Zipporah. While Moses was immersed in his divine mission and Hebrew culture, Zipporah was trying to balance her Midianite heritage with the new life they were building together. Zipporah's act wasn't merely fulfilling a religious requirement, it was a cry for recognition and for the protection of her family. The phrase, "bridegroom of blood," suggests she was acknowledging the gravity of the situation, but also affirming the connection she had with Moses, linking their lives in a context of blood, tradition, and duty. Imagine the emotional conflict in that moment. Zipporah must have felt the pressure of adjusting to a world that wasn't hers, while Moses struggled to fulfill his destiny. This cultural difference and the expectations arising from this dynamic must have caused constant frustration and tension. Zipporah might have felt sidelined, just a mere accessory in Moses' grand story, while her own role and beliefs were constantly placed in the background. And for Moses, so focused on freeing his people, how could he handle this new family reality? The tension wasn't just about Gershom's circumcision, it was a deeper struggle, a battle between the traditions of two cultures and the roles each of them was supposed to play. And what about the kids? How did all this affect Gershom and Eliezer? As these boys grew up, they were exposed to these family tensions, to their father's internal struggle between his duties as a leader and his responsibilities as a father. The environment they lived in was full of uncertainties. While their dad was preparing to face pharaohs and perform miracles, how could the kids understand this duality? Imagine the feeling of insecurity that might have hung over Gershom and Eliezer's childhood. They were constantly living in the shadow of a father who not only faced visible enemies, but also fought against a divine calling that demanded everything from him. Sometimes I wonder if they felt like they were competing for Moses' attention, who seemed more engaged in his role as a leader than as a father. It was a silent, intense struggle, and it must have created a space full of confusion and anxiety for the kids. The question hung in the air: does my dad really care about me, or am I just second to his mission? The boys might have wondered what it was like to be the sons of a man chosen by God to lead his people, while dealing with the reality of having a father who was emotionally and sometimes physically absent. What did they learn from Moses? What values and beliefs did they absorb as they watched their father's struggle? As Moses prepared to confront the Pharaoh and free the Hebrews, the very essence of his fatherhood was at stake. How would it have been for them to understand that their father had such a grand destiny? While their own childhood was shaped by these challenges, these questions and conflicts aren't just notes in an old story. They echo even today. Moses' struggle between being a leader and being a father is a battle many face. His family story is a powerful reminder that behind great leaders, there are common human struggles that often go unseen. As the narrative unfolds, it becomes clear that each member of Moses' family plays a crucial role in the story, each bringing their own struggles and victories to the table. When we think of Moses, it's easy to see him as a hero, the great liberator of the Hebrew people, the one who stood up to Pharaoh and led an entire nation to freedom. But behind that imposing figure was a man who struggled every day to balance divine expectations with the needs of his family. The weight of leading a nation of freed slaves wasn't just about command and strategy. It was an immense emotional burden. Imagine the dilemmas that must have run through his mind as he walked through the deserts of life. Am I doing the right thing? Are my choices protecting my family? Am I being the father they need? These questions were probably a constant echo in Moses' mind, especially in moments of crisis. He wasn't just facing external enemies, but also internal battles, where doubt and insecurity became his companions on his journey. God's call on his life put him in a position of constant pressure, making it hard to find time and space to be the present father his children, Gershom and Eliezer, needed. And what about Moses' perfection? Despite his extraordinary achievements, he was far from perfect. In fact, the scriptures show us that Moses was a deeply human man, vulnerable to mistakes and weaknesses. One of the most revealing episodes happens in Exodus 18, when Jethro, his father-in-law, decides to visit Moses. Upon seeing the visible wear and tear and the overload on his son-in-law, Jethro realizes that Moses was trying to carry the weight of leadership for an entire people on his own. He wasn't just dealing with matters of justice and direction, but was also overwhelmed by a constant influx of complaints and concerns from the people. "Why are you doing this alone?" asks Jethro, a wise and experienced man, offering Moses advice on how to delegate responsibilities and trust other leaders. This reveals not only Jethro's wisdom, but also Moses' fragility. Through this interaction, we see that even the greatest leader in Hebrew history had limitations, doubts, and above all, a desperate need for support. This scene serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of family and emotional support. The reality is that Moses, in his quest to be an exemplary leader, may not have been able to give his children the attention and love they truly needed. Imagine the scene when Moses came home after a long, exhausting day filled with tough decisions and endless conflicts. The desert heat was still intense, and the dust from the dry roads stuck to his skin. As he walked through the door, he was greeted by Gershom and Eliezer, who looked at him with a mix of admiration and a hint of expectation. What would he say to them? How could he convey the magnitude of his experiences without scaring them or pushing them away even more? These personal moments must have been rare and precious, like an oasis in the desert of his busy life. But what was said in those moments? Did Moses sit with his sons and tell them stories about the plagues God sent upon Egypt, each one more terrifying than the last? Or the way the Red Sea parted for them? He could describe the greatness of God's power, but how could he explain the fragility of his own heart? The conversation could easily turn into monologues about faith, freedom, and the struggle against oppression. But he must have also felt the need to listen to his children, to understand their fears and insecurities. As Gershom and Eliezer grew, conversations about faith and tradition probably became more challenging. Adolescence brings its own insecurities and questions, and having a father who was often absent focused more on the destiny of a nation than on the everyday problems of his family might have made them feel neglected. I wonder if the boys looked at Moses and wondered if they truly mattered to him. What was going on in their heads when he spoke about the promised land, when all they wanted to know was about their own journey and place in the world? In this context, Moses' family life was a blend of hope and despair. He longed to be the leader God wanted him to be, but at the same time, the pain of emotional separation from his family haunted him. The leader of the people of Israel was trying to juggle divine expectations and human needs, and this made him a tragic figure, full of inner conflicts. The scriptures don't give us many details about these intimate moments, but we can imagine the complexity of the relationship between Moses and his sons. He had to be God's spokesperson, but how could that coexist with his desire to be a loving and present father? The search for this perfect balance probably became an endless cycle of trial and error, a path that led to self-reflection and the need for personal growth. Through this struggle, Moses not only became a stronger leader, but also a more understanding man. He learned the importance of vulnerability, support, and unconditional love, not just in relation to God, but also to his own family. When we reflect on Moses' life, we see that his greatness was not just in the epic victories, but also in the humility to recognize that even as a chosen leader, he was still a man seeking connection and meaning in his role as a father. As Moses' grand story progresses, an intriguing phenomenon becomes evident. The presence of his sons, Gershom and Eliezer, begins to fade from the narrative. These figures, who once seemed promising, become almost invisible in the vastness of the Exodus story. This raises deep and unsettling questions. What happened to them? Could it be that over time they chose to stay in Midian, in the safety of Jethro's home, the loving grandfather who was always a support in their lives? Or perhaps the weight of their father's mission became so overwhelming that they could no longer identify with Moses' journey, this epic of liberation and discovery. The truth is that Moses' legacy was massive, and the shadow he cast over his children was undeniable. Being the child of such a prominent leader could have created intense inner conflict. They might have felt like their own paths and dreams were overshadowed by their father's grand accomplishments. Imagine the dilemma they faced. How do you find your identity in a world where Moses was the man chosen by God to lead the Hebrew nation to the Promised Land? Gershom, the older son, and Eliezer, the younger one, grew up under the shadow of a father who was often absent, not out of lack of love, but because of the magnitude of his divine mission. The Bible gives us few clues about their lives after the Exodus. What we do know is that the descendants of Gershom and Eliezer are mentioned elsewhere in Scripture, especially in 1 Chronicles 23:15 through 17, where it reveals that Moses' sons became leaders in the priestly line. This shows that even though the Bible doesn't go deep into their individual stories, they weren't just Moses' sons. They were an integral part of Israel's lineage, contributing to the history of God's chosen people. But behind every name mentioned, there's an untold story, a set of experiences and internal struggles that shape their identities. Think about the challenges Gershom and Eliezer faced. trying to build their lives in a context where their father's name echoed everywhere. They probably lived in a constant state of comparison, struggling to break free from the expectations that came with their famous last name. How would it have been for them to see Moses' epic feats, the plagues that freed the Hebrews, the crossing of the Red Sea, and the giving of the law at Sinai, and realize that their own story seemed insignificant in comparison? The pressure to become as great as their father must have been overwhelming. This makes us wonder, what was family life like inside the tent? Were there moments when Moses sat with them, trying to pass down his faith and teachings, or was he so consumed by the responsibility of leadership that those interactions became rare? How did the boys handle the rumors and stories circulating among the people about Moses' greatness? Did they find comfort in their father's faith, or did they feel lost in the midst of it all? The Bible tells us that Eliezer, for example, eventually became a priest, and this choice might have been both a way to honor his father's legacy and a path of self-affirmation. By taking on a role in the religious community, Eliezer wasn't just following in Moses' footsteps, but also building his own legacy. It's interesting to note that priests were seen as mediators between God and the people, a responsibility that surely wasn't taken lightly, especially coming from Moses' son. On the other hand, Gershom, whose name means foreigner, might have carried a different emotional weight. He grew up in an environment where Hebrew identity was constantly reinforced, but also where the difference in his experience as the son of a man who faced Pharaoh and had divine visions could have isolated him. This dichotomy of being part of the chosen people yet feeling like an outsider within his own family must have created significant inner turmoil. So, Moses' story is intricately woven into the lives of his children. Even though they're not always in the spotlight, their personal journeys are a silent testament to the struggle and resilience that shaped not just their lives, but also the story of the Israelite nation as a whole. In the end, Moses' story serves as a powerful reminder that even the greatest figures have their vulnerabilities, and that journeys of faith and discovery are often shared by those who remain behind the scenes. This journey of faith wasn't just Moses, it was also his children's. They might have faded from the main narratives, but their experiences, struggles, and triumphs shouldn't be forgotten. So, even in their absence, they still echo through the pages of history, representing the complexity of family life and the search for identity in a world that often values visible success more than invisible personal battles. And this is where we dive into one of the biggest mysteries surrounding the figure of Moses, the theory of hidden children. While the biblical narrative focuses on Gershom and Eliezer, several ancient traditions and apocryphal texts suggest that Moses may have had more children who lived in the shadows of history and, in some way, played secret and significant roles in the story of the Hebrew people. These hidden lineages, far from the spotlight of history, could be crucial in understanding not just Moses' life, but also the development of the Israelite identity. One of the texts that brings this theory to light is the Book of Jubilees, an apocryphal work that, although not included in the biblical canon, was respected in some ancient Jewish communities. This book, dating back to the 2nd century BCE, offers a reinterpretation of biblical narratives, adding details and expanding the understanding of the history of the people of Israel. In it, there are mentions of descendants of Moses that are not addressed in the canonical scriptures. The idea that Moses might have had other children who do not appear in the more familiar stories leads us to question what these unknown figures might have meant for the Hebrew nation. Imagine the depth of this mystery, children who, under Moses' guidance, would have access to profound knowledge about God's laws, spirituality, and the mysteries of creation. Could they have been the guardians of secret traditions passed down in whispers, protecting the people of Israel in times of crisis? These apocryphal accounts lead us to a fascinating enigma, suggesting that Moses' lineage may have continued in ways we never imagined. These ideas are thought-provoking. What secrets might have been passed between these hidden generations? We might think that just as Moses received knowledge directly from God, these hidden children could have been graced with visions or teachings that never reached the general public. Moses himself, in his relentless pursuit of God, was known for his intimate relationship with the Almighty. He ascended Mount Sinai and received the tablets of the law, an epic moment that shaped Israel's spirituality. It's intriguing to imagine that other children of his, even in secret, may have received similar divine instructions, perhaps guiding their lives in a discreet but impactful way. In Jewish tradition, it's common for certain knowledge to be considered sacred and only accessible to a few. This raises the possibility that these hidden children, if they existed, may have been trained to become leaders or sages in their communities, preserving and passing on sacred teachings from generation to generation. In times of oppression, where faith might have been threatened, who knows if these figures could have played a crucial role in maintaining hope and tradition among the Israelites. Even more intriguing is the fact that many scholars believe the Book of Jubilees was used to educate future generations about the importance of their heritage, emphasizing the need to maintain the purity of lineage and faith. If Moses had other children, they might have been tasked with protecting this knowledge, perhaps living among the tribes or in isolated regions, far from the main narrative's focus, but always ready to act when the need arose. Tradition also offers us fascinating characters who may have been part of this lineage. Some texts mention a figure named Joshua, who, although better known as Moses' successor, might have had deeper family ties. He was the first to enter the Promised Land and played a crucial role in the conquest of Canaan. What would we lose if we knew that he, in fact, shared a blood relationship with Moses, beyond the simple mentor-disciple bond? And what if we looked beyond the canonical stories and discovered that these hidden children were somehow interconnected with significant events in Israel's history? Imagine a son of Moses who becomes a leader in a tribal community, defending the traditions of his father and keeping alive the spirit of freedom that Moses so ardently sought for the people. We might even glimpse moments where these hidden children became spokespersons of a message of hope in times of despair, perhaps even acting as spiritual guides in the oral traditions passed down from generation to generation. However, the lack of concrete records about these children and their lives leaves us on the edge of an abyss of speculation and mystery. The Bible mentions in Deuteronomy 34, 5-6, that Moses died in a land God had promised him, but gives no further details about what happened to his children after his death. Did they become anonymous figures in history, or did they continue carrying their father's legacy in a hidden plan? These questions invite us to reflect on the complexity of family and history, where not all legacies are visible and not all stories are told. The theory of Moses' hidden children challenges us to look beyond the surface of the biblical narrative and consider the deeper layers of what might have been. In a world where faith and identity are shaped by stories and traditions, the possibility of a hidden lineage becomes not just a matter of genealogy, but a meditation on how legacies are formed, preserved, and ultimately revealed. Moses' journey therefore invites us to explore not only the story of one man, but the rich tapestry of interconnected lives that make up the narrative of God's people. Now I invite you to reflect on the impact that these hidden children could have had on the pages of Israelite history. If Moses really shared some of his wisdom and spiritual legacy with them, as many oral traditions suggest, these children might have operated in the shadows, exerting a quiet yet profound influence on future generations. Picture them as figures who, though undocumented in the canonical scriptures, were essential in preserving the identity and faith of their people. These hidden children could have become guardians of the sacred teachings, the ones who kept the flame of Israelite faith alive in times of crisis. The biblical story is full of moments when the nation strayed from the path, seeking idols and forgetting the covenant made with God. It would be fascinating to imagine that while the people went astray, these descendants of Moses were secretly preserving their father's message, passing it down from generation to generation as a sacred legacy that could one day bloom again. In the Bible, we find passages about the importance of teaching God's laws to children. In Deuteronomy 6:6-7, it says, "These words, which I command you today, shall be in your heart, and you shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up." This leads us to believe that Moses not only intended to pass his lessons to his visible children, but maybe even to others who don't appear in the pages of the Bible. These teachings could have spread through rituals, traditions, and practices that were adapted and preserved in local communities. Moreover, it's intriguing to think that these children might have become teachers, sages, or leaders in small communities, keeping the tradition of faith and law alive. They could have been responsible for preserving the rituals Moses established, like Passover, which commemorated the liberation of the Hebrew people from Egypt, Exodus 12. While Moses' story as the liberator resonated in synagogues and spread among the people, his hidden children might have implemented practices that ensured the continuity of worshiping the Lord in their communities, maintaining a connection with the past. Picture a scenario where, during times of persecution or oppression, these hidden children gathered in small houses, away from the curious eyes of the world. There, they might have taught the scriptures, telling stories of the past and explaining the importance of faith in a God who freed Israel from slavery. They could have passed on teachings about the rights and duties of God's people, like we see in Leviticus 19:18, where it is commanded, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." Practicing this love and justice could have been a key part of the lessons these children shared, shaping the nation's ethics and morals. As historical events unfolded and the people faced challenges, these children could have stored texts or teachings that later became part of the sacred books. Imagine one of these descendants retreating to the mountains in a moment of reflection, jotting down words that express the essence of faith, like those we find in the Psalms, which express both struggle and trust in God. As we can see, the Bible mentions that during times of crisis, such as in the time of the Judges, the people often drifted away from God, but would also turn to liberators and spiritual leaders. Judges 2:16. It's fascinating to think that these hidden children, even if not mentioned, might have inspired these leaders or even served as advisors during critical moments, guiding the people with the wisdom inherited from their father. For example, the figure of Samuel, the last of the judges and the first of the prophets, may have been influenced or taught by this hidden lineage. It's exciting to imagine that while the nation cried out for a king, there were those in silence, still leading the people in the right direction, preserving Moses' traditions. In 1 Samuel 12:24, Samuel says, "Only fear the Lord and serve him in truth with all your heart, for consider what great things he has done for you." This connection to the past and the transmission of the legacy could have deeper roots than we imagine. And so, while Moses was remembered as a public leader and liberator, his hidden children might have been the influential figures working in the shadows, shaping the faith and practice of the people of Israel. This dynamic reveals the complexity of the biblical story and invites us to reflect on the role of untold traditions and hidden legacies that shape the identity of a nation. But what about the proof? The lack of records is a curious and intriguing factor. The question on many minds is, did these descendants really exist? And if they did, why don't we have concrete traces or reports about their lives and legacies? The absence of historical and archaeological evidence about Moses' children raises a lot of speculation. Could this gap mean there was a deliberate effort to erase these stories from collective memory? When we look at the Bible, we find a strong focus on Moses' life and deeds, but the narrative becomes surprisingly sparse when it comes to his descendants. Aside from Gershom and Eleazar, his other children, if they existed, seem to have vanished into the mists of time. This leads us to believe that perhaps these children didn't fit into the main narrative the biblical story was trying to tell. But what would be the reason for such silence? Some scholars argue that certain documents could have been destroyed, or that records of this lineage were intentionally erased to protect a secret. Israel's history itself is filled with conflict and tension, and the search for a national identity may have led to the exclusion of figures who, while having a direct connection to Moses, didn't align with the people's vision of a grand and unshakable leader. The figure of Moses is central to the narrative of liberation and the giving of the law, but what about his descendants? They could have been seen as a threat to the established narrative, or perhaps their existence would have compromised the purity of the legacy the nation wanted to preserve. Historians and archaeologists have pored over ancient traditions and accounts in hopes of unraveling these mysteries. Over the centuries, many researchers, like the renowned archaeologist William Albright, have dedicated themselves to understanding Moses' personal life, exploring the lands mentioned in the Bible. However, they often encounter an enigmatic silence. Biblical archaeology, which has uncovered cities, artifacts, and inscriptions, has its limitations when it comes to lesser-known figures and their lineages. A fascinating example is the search for Edom, the region where Moses' descendants are believed to have settled. In Numbers 20:14-21, we see Moses trying to obtain permission to cross the land of Edom. If Moses' children truly settled there, wouldn't it be surprising to find archaeological evidence confirming their presence? However, excavations in the region, while revealing many aspects of ancient life, have not produced definitive information about Moses' lineage. Also, the lack of records might reflect the cultural complexities of the time. The history of the Hebrews was often told orally, and many details could have been lost over the centuries. Oral tradition is a powerful way of passing down knowledge, but it's also vulnerable to changes, adaptations, and eventually forgetting. The stories that survived in the Bible were undoubtedly shaped by social and political interests that aimed to strengthen national identity and the connection with God. Imagine a scenario where the existence of hidden children of Moses would be a delicate topic, one that could raise questions about power succession, the legitimacy of leadership claims, or even the interpretation of sacred laws. In this context, the absence of evidence could have been a conscious effort to keep the story pure, preserving the image of Moses as an unparalleled leader despite his flaws. On the other hand, the lack of documentation might also leave room for speculation and debate. The Bible mentions different tribes and families that rose and disappeared over time, like the Nephilim, whose stories are full of mystery and complexity. The presence of legends and myths in various cultures around the world raises the possibility that Moses' hidden children could be part of a broader tradition, one that intertwines with narratives from other civilizations, perhaps safeguarding what they knew within closed circles. The possibility that certain stories and lineages were deliberately forgotten or hidden is not just intriguing, it also makes us reflect on how history is written and who gets to speak in that narrative. The search for hidden truths echoes many of the issues that pervade our own history, where different groups try to ensure their voices and legacies aren't lost to time. So, what can we conclude about Moses' lineage and his children? The silence around them might be an invitation to look deeper, not only to find evidence that supports their stories, but also to think about what it means to preserve a legacy. After all, every figure that appears or disappears in the pages of history carries with them not only their own story, but also the complexity of an era, a people, and a faith. Regardless of everything, one thing is clear. Moses' greatest legacy isn't in his bloodline, but in his spiritual impact. This might seem like a simple statement at first, but when we look deeper into his life and actions, we see that Moses' legacy is much more complex and profound. He left Israel a robust faith, grounded in divine law and the pursuit of justice. Moses, a central figure in biblical history, not only freed the Israelites from slavery in Egypt, but also became the mediator of the covenant between God and his people. When he received the tablets of the law on Mount Sinai, he didn't just bring a set of rules, but a guide that would define the identity of the Hebrew people for generations to come. These laws, carved in stone, were more than just instructions. They were promises of a direct relationship with the Creator. Imagine the scene. Moses, surrounded by clouds and lightning, coming down the mountain with the tablets in hand, the determination on his face reflecting the responsibility he carried. He wasn't just bringing the law, he was delivering a deep understanding of God's character and what he expected from his people. These instructions included principles on justice, mercy, and love for others, themes that would echo throughout biblical history and still resonate today. Furthermore, the idea of sacrifice, a central concept in Israelite worship, was something Moses emphasized. Sacrifice was seen as an act of obedience and reverence toward God, a way to reconnect with the divine. By establishing the rules for sacrifices and religious festivals, he helped shape a society that recognized the importance of communion with God. But there's more to Moses' story than just the rules he brought. His life is a testament to perseverance in the face of immense challenges. From his childhood as the adopted son of Pharaoh's daughter to his exile in Midian and his triumphant return to Egypt, his journey was filled with trials. The way he dealt with Pharaoh's resistance, the complaints of the people during the desert journey, and Israel's sins along the way, teaches us about the fragility of the human condition and the need for spiritual leadership. Think about the critical moments, like when the people turned to idols, building a golden calf while Moses was on Sinai. Moses' desperation and anger when he came down the mountain and saw the rampant idolatry reflect his love for his people and his devotion to God's will. In that moment, we see a leader unafraid to confront sin and seek purification for the community, showing that true love often requires sacrifice. This dedication to the spirituality of Israel's people makes us reflect. Did Moses, knowing the challenges he'd face, dedicate all his energy to shaping his people's faith, not so concerned about direct heirs? What really matters in the end is the continuity of faith and the transmission of spiritual values. His true legacy is the message, the mission he carried with such zeal until the end. Moses' teachings on obedience to God and the importance of social justice resonate in every prophet and leader that followed. He sparked a spiritual revolution where each individual was not only seen as part of a collective, but also as someone with direct access to God, regardless of their background or status. This is the essence of what it means to be part of the faith community that Moses founded. Furthermore, Jewish tradition keeps Moses' heritage alive through teachings passed down from generation to generation, like in the practices of the Sabbath and festivals such as Passover, which celebrates the liberation from Egypt. Each of these traditions carries an echo of Moses' lessons, perpetuating his spiritual impact through practices that unite communities to this day. And so, even though records of his hidden children may not have survived, the strength of his spiritual legacy remains unshaken. Moses' story continues to inspire millions, showing that true inheritance is not found only in blood, but in the ideas, faith, and principles that shape a nation. By telling Moses' story, we are not just revisiting the past, but also connecting with the future he helped shape. Moses' spirituality, then, becomes a beacon for all of us, lighting the way we should follow. How can we, as individuals and as a society, continue this legacy? The answer might lie in the small daily choices we make to live with faith, justice, and love. We've reached the end of this journey, but the real reflection is just beginning. What can we take away from all of this? Throughout our exploration, we've realized that Moses' life is full of mysteries and lessons that transcend time and culture. Perhaps the biggest lesson is that we don't always need to know all the details to understand the greatness of a person. Moses' figure is not just about the stories we find in the Torah or the Bible, but about a legacy of faith, leadership, and transformation. Moses teaches us that a person's true legacy lies in their actions, the changes they bring about, and the lives they touch. He wasn't just a leader. He was God's instrument to free the people of Israel from oppression and slavery. His life story shows us that the impact of a person isn't measured by how many children they have or their level of fame, but by the depth of their contributions and the influence they have on others. Imagine the scene of the Red Sea parting. This is a moment where faith and courage united to change the fate of a nation. Moses, with his staff raised, was the channel through which God performed a monumental miracle, showing that true greatness lies in making oneself available to the divine. This dramatic and suspenseful story reveals how a single act of faith can redefine history. So, even if Moses' children were forgotten by history, Moses' impact remains. He inspires us to seek our purpose and mission even when facing the unknown. Moses faced countless challenges, from Pharaoh's resistance to complaints from his own people. And even in the midst of doubt and adversity, he never lost sight of God's promise. That's a powerful lesson that teaches us to persevere. We can also learn from the way Moses handled conflicts. In Exodus 18, we find a significant episode where his father-in-law, Jethro, advises him on the importance of delegating responsibilities. This shows us that leadership isn't just about power, but about the wisdom to recognize that we can't do everything alone. Moses' humility in listening to advice and adapting is a vital lesson for anyone who aspires to be an effective leader. Moreover, Moses' journey illustrates the importance of communion with God. He often withdrew to pray and seek guidance, as we see in Exodus 33:11, where it says, "The Lord spoke to Moses face to face, as a man speaks to his friend." This intimacy with the Creator is a clear example of how we should cultivate our own spiritual lives, seeking a deep connection that guides us through our own challenges. And what about the influence Moses had on future generations? The Torah, which he wrote under divine guidance, is still a cornerstone of the Jewish faith and continues to influence millions worldwide. His teachings on justice, mercy, and love for others are principles we can all adopt in our lives. He became a symbol of the struggle for freedom and the pursuit of truth, showing that even amidst pain and despair, there is always a path to hope and redemption. In the end, Moses' life invites us to reflect on our own existence and the legacies we are building. How can we be agents of change in our communities? What values do we want to pass on to future generations? Moses' story is a call to action, a reminder that each of us has the ability to make a meaningful impact on the lives of others. So, as we wrap up this narrative, let's carry with us the message that, just like Moses, we can all face our challenges, inspire others, and leave an indelible mark on the world. May we follow the example of this great leader, always striving to live with purpose, faith, and the courage to make a difference. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey through Moses' life and legacy. If you enjoyed this video and want to dive even deeper into stories that inspire and transform, don't forget to leave a like and share it with your friends. This helps us reach more people and spread these powerful messages. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to get notifications for new videos. We've got a lot more fascinating content coming your way. Lastly, I want to hear from you. What impressed you the most about Moses' story? Drop your comment below and let's chat. Until next time.